There is a specific physical sensation that hits you exactly 3 seconds before you break a promise to yourself. It isn't exhaustion, and it isn't logical reasoning. It is a quiet, almost invisible negotiation where your brain whispers that it is okay to stop just for today. Most of us believe that overcoming this voice requires more willpower, more motivation, or a better app to track our habits. But history suggests we are looking for the solution in the wrong place. If you look back at the Edo period in Japan, specifically at the training methods of the Shinobi, you find something that contradicts modern self-help advice. These were operatives who had to survive alone in the mountains for months, maintaining absolute silence and rigid routines without anyone watching them. They didn't have accountability partners, and they certainly didn't rely on motivation. They relied on a psychological architecture called Ninpo. When you strip away the mythology and the movies, what remains is a brutal but effective understanding of human biology. The Shinobi understood that the human brain is not designed for discipline. It is designed for survival and energy conservation. To understand how to bypass this biological limitation, we have to look at the story of a boy named Tishi. In the records of Iga province around 1540, Tishi was not a prodigy. In fact, he was known in his village by a nickname that translates roughly to Tishi the Lazy. His story matters because he represents the baseline state of almost every modern human being. He was a dreamer who was addicted to the comfort of tomorrow. Tishi had a cycle that you will likely recognize. He would wake up on a Monday morning with a sudden surge of inspiration. He would vow to train, to become strong, to learn the trade of the shadow warriors. He would do 3 push-ups, feel the burn in his arms, and immediately justify stopping to eat breakfast. He would promise to meditate for 20 minutes, but 2 minutes in, his mind would wander, and he would stand up, telling himself he wasn't in the right headspace. By Tuesday, the promises he made on Monday were gone, replaced by the fog of routine. His father, a blacksmith with calloused hands and a realist's view of the world, saw this pattern and offered the only advice he knew. He told Teishi to stop chasing ghosts. He told him that the Shinobi were legends invented to scare children and that Teishi should accept his fate as a laborer. The tragedy here is that the father knew the Shinobi schools existed. He knew where they were, but he also knew his son. He knew that without a fundamental shift in psychology, his son would fail. But here's the part most people miss about failure. We assume failure is a lack of effort. In reality, failure is often just a lack of leverage. Teishi was trying to change his behavior without changing his environment or his identity. The shift happened on an ordinary afternoon. Teishi was playing in the woods, pretending to train, when he encountered a man standing perfectly still on the path. The man was dressed simply, but he carried himself with a stillness that made the birds in the trees go quiet. He looked at the boy and asked a question that cut through the excuses. He didn't ask what Teishi wanted to be. He asked how many times Teishi had promised himself that today would be different. That question is terrifying because it demands a number. Teishi knew the number was in the hundreds. The man, who was a recruiter for the Koga school, made an offer. He turned and started walking toward the mountain peak. He said if Teishi could keep up, he would show him the school. If not, the boy should go home and never speak of his dreams again. This brings us to the first psychological barrier in the Ninpo system. The cost of entry must be high enough to burn the bridge behind you. The climb took 3 hours. For a boy who couldn't focus for 20 minutes, this should have been impossible. The first hour
was adrenaline. The second hour was misery. His lungs burned, his legs shook, and his mind began the familiar negotiation script. It said, "Go back." It said, "This is dangerous." It said, "You can try again tomorrow." But something was different this time. The man in front of him didn't look back. He offered no encouragement. He offered no sympathy. This absence of validation forced Teishi to look inward. He realized that if he stopped now, he wasn't just failing a workout. He was confirming his father's diagnosis. He was confirming that he was, at his core, broken. When they reached the summit, Teishi collapsed. He vomited. He passed out. But he had arrived. He had completed the first lesson without realizing it. You do not negotiate with the mountain. You either climb or you stay at the bottom. The next morning, the real education began. And this is where the modern understanding of discipline usually falls apart. We tend to think of discipline as a private struggle, something we do in the quiet of our own homes. The Koga school rejected this entirely. They understood that humans are social animals, terrified of exclusion. Tishi woke up in a room with 15 other students. The master stood in the center and explained the first pillar of their system, ketsui. This translates to the decision or the determination, but in this context it meant the oath. In the modern world, we make silent resolutions. We tell ourselves we will start a diet or write a book. If we fail, nobody knows but us. The shame is private and therefore bearable. In the Ninpo system, a private promise is considered a lie waiting to happen. On the first day, every student had to stand before the entire community and declare their intention. They had to say, "I am a student of the way. My word is my life. If I break my word, I am nothing." This sounds dramatic to our modern ears, but look at the neuroscience. When you declare an identity publicly, your brain tags that identity as survivor.
Mechanism. For our ancestors, losing the trust of the tribe meant exile and death. By forcing the students to stake their social value on their discipline, the master hijacked their primitive fear of death and used it as fuel for focus. For Tishi, this changed the equation of pain. On the third day, his body was wrecked. Waking up felt impossible. His internal voice started the negotiation. Just rest today, you can double the effort tomorrow. But then he looked around. If he stayed in bed, 15 other men would see it. The master would record it. The shame of that public failure was more painful than the physical agony of training. So he stood up. He stood up not because he had willpower, but because the system had made sitting down too expensive. However, social pressure is a finite resource. It can get you out of bed, but it cannot navigate the complexity of the day. Tishi soon found that while he was showing up, his mind was still chaotic. He was constantly asking questions. What should I train today? Is this the best use of my time? Should I focus on strength or stealth? The master saw this hesitation in his eyes. He pulled Tishi aside and explained that his fatigue wasn't physical, it was decision fatigue. Every time Tishi asked, "What should I do?" he was spending a unit of energy that should have been used for execution. This introduced the second pillar, Rei, or the unchanging rhythm. The master explained that the universe operates on constants. The sun does not decide when to rise. The seasons do not negotiate their arrival. To become a warrior, one had to remove time as a variable. The rule was absolute. The bell rings, you move. There is no gap between the stimulus and the response for the mind to insert an excuse. This is where the risk quietly increases for most of us. We think flexibility is a virtue. We think we should listen to our bodies and train when we feel energetic. The data implies the opposite. When you vary your start time,
body never learns when to prepare for the load. By strictly enforcing the exact same wake-up time and training slot, Tishi's biology began to anticipate the stress. By the 19th day, Tishi woke up 2 minutes before the bell. His cortisol levels had adjusted to the rhythm. The negotiation of when had been silenced. But silencing the when only exposed a more dangerous enemy, the how. Tishi was about to face the part of the process that breaks almost everyone who tries to build a high-performance life. It wasn't pain, and it wasn't exhaustion. It was boredom. The master laid out the plan for the next 100 days. It sounded like madness. Tishi was to perform the exact same sequence of movements: 50 push-ups, 100 squats, 30 minutes of specific sword forms, 20 minutes of breathwork, same order, same intensity, 0 variation. Tishi, like any modern person accustomed to novelty, rebelled internally. He thought, "This is stupid. I need variety to grow. I need to shock the muscles." He looked at the other students, and he saw the same doubt. One student even whispered during dinner that this robotic repetition was killing their spirit. That student was expelled the next morning, not because he complained, but because he misunderstood the purpose of the training. The master explained that the desire for variety is just the ego trying to entertain itself. True skill does not come from doing 1,000 different things. It comes from doing one thing until the conscious mind stops interfering with the action. This is the concept of automation. We know now, through studies of the basal ganglia, that when a motor pattern is repeated in the same context enough times, the brain shifts control of that behavior from the prefrontal cortex, the thinking part of the brain, to the deep primitive structures. Tishi struggled. The first week was easy because it was new. The second week was hard because the novelty wore off. The third week was
psychological torture.
His brain screamed for a new stimulus. It begged him to just change the order of the exercises, just to feel something different. This is the moment where most people quit their programs. We mistake boredom for a lack of progress. But Tishi remembered the oath. He remembered the public declaration. He kept going. And then, around week 6, the noise in his head stopped. He was in the middle of his sword practice when he realized he wasn't thinking about his feet. He wasn't thinking about the angle of the blade. His body was moving through the complex sequence like water flowing down a carved channel. Because he wasn't spending mental energy on what comes next, his awareness was free to notice things he had never seen before. He noticed the slight tension in his pinky finger that was throwing off his balance. He noticed the rhythm of his own breath matching the wind. He discovered that structure didn't trap him, it freed him. But just as he began to feel invincible, biology threw a curveball. On day 45, Tishi woke up with a high fever. His joints ached, his head throbbed, and he was shivering. Standard medical advice and common sense would say this is the time to stop. Rest, recover, live to fight another day. This advice sounds logical until you look closer at how habits are actually formed and broken. The master didn't care about the fever. He cared about the pattern. Tishi went to the master, shivering, and asked if he should rest. The master looked at him and clarified the difference between resting and quitting. He explained the third pillar, muku, or practice without gaps. The logic is ruthless. If you skip a day completely, you create a psychological permission structure. You teach your brain that not feeling well is a valid reason to break the contract. Today it is a fever. Tomorrow it is a headache. Next week it is just a bad mood. The threshold for quitting gets lower every time you use the exit door. The master's
instruction was specific. If you cannot run, walk. If you cannot walk, crawl. If you cannot lift the heavy sword, lift a stick. But you do not break the chain. Tishi dragged himself to the training floor. He did 10 push-ups instead of 50. He moved through the sword forms in slow motion, barely holding his balance. It was ugly. It was pathetic by athletic standards, but psychologically, it was a triumph. He proved to his primitive brain that the routine was more important than his temporary physical state. When the fever broke 2 days later, he returned to full intensity without any friction. He hadn't lost the groove. If he had stopped completely, the inertia of starting over might have crushed him. This concept of no 0 days protected him from himself, but the external world has a way of testing discipline that goes beyond illness. On day 80, with the finish line in sight, Tishi's father arrived at the gates of the school. There was an emergency in the village. Tishi was needed at home immediately. This is the ultimate test. It's easy to be disciplined when you are in a monastery, protected from the chaos of real life. But what happens when life punches you in the face? Tishi panicked. He had 20 days left. If he left now, he failed the 100-day ordeal. He begged the master for an exception. The master's response was cold. Do you think the enemy waits for your mother to get well? Do you think war pauses for your family emergency? This led to the fourth pillar, the one that separates the amateur from the professional, zeni, or prior preparation. The master explained that anxiety comes from the unknown. We panic because we haven't decided how to handle the disruption. The Shinobi way is to pre-decide the reaction to every possible crisis. They sat down and listed the obstacles. If it rains, train under the patio. If injured, train the uninjured limb. If traveling, train before dawn. If family emergency, execute the condensed 15
protocol. By making these decisions before the crisis occurred, Tishi removed the need to think when he was emotional. He went home with his father. He worked all day dealing with the crisis in the village. The neighbors watched him with confusion as he woke up at 4 a.m. every single morning to perform his condensed ritual in the dark. They whispered that he was obsessive. They said he should relax given the situation. But they didn't understand that he wasn't doing it for the workout. He was doing it to keep the thread of his identity from snapping. He returned to the school on day 83. The master asked simply, "How many gaps?" Tishi replied, "None." By day 95, the other students stopped talking to him about his training. They stopped offering encouragement. They stopped making jokes. A silence had formed around Tishi. It wasn't the silence of isolation. It was the silence of respect, perhaps mixed with a little bit of fear. He no longer looked like a boy trying to be a warrior. He moved with a terrifying economy of motion. He didn't speak about what he was going to do. He just did it. The gap between thought and action had completely vanished. When the 100th day arrived, Tishi expected fireworks. He expected a surge of emotion, a feeling of victory. He completed the final repetition of the sword form. The bell rang. And he felt nothing. No joy, no relief, just a vast, quiet emptiness. He walked to the master, confused. He asked why he didn't feel happy. The master smiled, a rare expression, and introduced him to the final state, the goal of all this suffering. Mushin, no mind. The master told him, the emptiness you feel is the absence of the weak self, the voice that used to complain, the voice that used to negotiate, the voice that needed a pat on the back. It has starved to death. You don't feel excitement because this isn't an achievement anymore. It is just who you are. Tishi had entered the danger zone of high performance. He
was no longer relatable to the people he had left behind in the village. When he eventually returned to the world, he found that his discipline didn't inspire people, it agitated them. 3 months later, on his first real mission, he had to lie in a ditch for 3 days waiting for a target. Cold, hungry, covered in mud. His partner on the mission, a man hired from another province, complained incessantly. He talked about how unfair it was, how much his back hurt. Tishi just watched the road. The partner asked, "How do you not care?" Tishi realized he couldn't explain it. He couldn't explain that he had spent 100 days killing the part of his brain that cared about comfort. This is where the advice sounds right, but can be dangerous for your social life. When you build this level of discipline, you become a mirror. When people looked at Tishi, they didn't just see a disciplined warrior. They saw a reflection of their own concessions. They saw the workouts they skipped, the projects they abandoned, the promises they broke. And because that reflection was painful, they attacked him. They called him a machine. They said he was unbalanced. They said he needed to live a little. But Tishi knew the truth. He was living more fully than they ever would. He wasn't enslaved by his impulses. He wasn't a victim of his mood. He was free. The system that created this freedom, the system of the 5 pillars, is available to anyone, but it requires a price that very few are willing to pay. It doesn't ask for your money. It asks for your old identity. If you are tired of the cycle of starting and stopping, if you are tired of the Monday morning promises that die by Tuesday afternoon, you have to stop looking for tips and tricks. You have to look at the structure. There is a way to implement these 5 pillars in the modern world without living in a mountain temple. But be warned, once you start this process, you cannot go back to being the person who negotiates with
themselves. This is how you begin. You don't need a mountain temple. You don't need a master watching you with a bamboo stick. But you do need to understand why your previous attempts at discipline have collapsed. They failed because you treated discipline as a software update, something you could just download and install on top of your current life, when in reality, it is an operating system replacement. You cannot run high-performance software on an operating system built for comfort. To apply the first pillar, ketsui, or the oath, you must stop protecting your ego. Think about the last time you decided to get in shape or start a business. You probably kept it relatively quiet. You might have told a supportive friend or partner, someone who would forgive you if you failed. We do this to ensure ourselves against the pain of public embarrassment. But that safety net is exactly what strangles your potential. In the modern world, you don't stand in front of a village. Instead, you find one person whose respect you desperately crave. It could be a mentor, a rival, or a parent. You go to them and you state your goal clearly, with a deadline. You give them permission to hold you accountable. You say, if I do not complete this by this date, I have broken my word to you. This sounds extreme, but notice what happens to your biology when you do this. Suddenly, hitting the snooze button isn't just a personal choice. It is a threat to your social status. You are hacking your brain's fear of rejection to drive you forward when your willpower runs empty. This leads directly into the second pillar, rei, the unchanging rhythm. The mistake most of us make is trying to fit discipline into the free time of our day. We look at our calendar and think, I'll train on Tuesday at 5 p.m. and Wednesday at 7 a.m. This looks efficient, but it is neurologically disastrous. Your body operates on circadian rhythms. It anticipates stress based on cues. If you constantly shift the time of your
Effort. Your body never releases the pre-activity hormones that prepare you for the work. You are fighting against your own physiology every single time. You must pick a time. It doesn't have to be 4 a.m., it just has to be non-negotiable. If you choose 7 a.m., you are there at 7 a.m. If you are tired at 7 a.m. If you are busy at 7 a.m. By removing the variable of when, you stop asking yourself, do I have time today? That question is a trap. You don't find time for the things that define you. You claim it. But here's the part most people miss, and it is why the fitness industry makes billions of dollars selling you new programs every January. We are addicted to novelty. We think the problem is the routine, so we change the routine. This violates the third pillar, kata, or perfect form. In the modern context, kata means embracing the boredom of repetition. You need to pick one simple, effective protocol, whether it is a basic gym routine, a writing schedule, or a study method, and you need to lock it in for 100 days. No tweaking, no optimizing, no switching to a better program you saw on YouTube. Optimization is the enemy of execution for beginners. When you are constantly tweaking your plan, you are satisfying the brain's craving for dopamine without actually doing the work. You feel productive because you are planning, but you are just procrastinating with a spreadsheet. When you commit to the same boring routine for 3 months, you hit the boredom barrier around week 3. This is where you will feel a physical urge to quit or change things up. This is not a signal to stop. This is the signal that your brain is finally rewiring itself. If you push through that boredom, you reach the state of flow where the action becomes automatic. However, even with the best routine, life will try to break you. This is where the advice sounds right, but can still be dangerous. The all-or-nothing mentality is the hallmark of the amateur.
We think that if we can't do the full hour, we shouldn't bother. This violates the fourth pillar, muku, or practice without gaps. You need to create what I call a crisis protocol. This is the modern version of Tishi training in the rain. Look at your habit. If your habit is a 1-hour gym session, what is your crisis protocol? Maybe it is 15 minutes of push-ups and squats in your living room. If your habit is writing 1,000 words, your crisis protocol is writing 100 words. The goal of the crisis protocol is not progress, it is sustainment. It keeps the neurological pathway open. On the days when your kid is sick, your boss is screaming, and your car breaks down, you do not skip. You execute the crisis protocol. You do the 15 minutes. You check the box. You go to sleep knowing you are still the person who shows up. The data suggests that the single biggest predictor of long-term habit failure is not the first skipped day, but the second. 1 missed day is a mistake. 2 missed days is the start of a new, lazy identity. The crisis protocol prevents that second miss. Finally, we arrive at Zeni, prior preparation. In the corporate world, we call this risk management, but in your personal life, it is just common sense that is rarely applied. You know the obstacles that trip you up. You know that if you have junk food in the house, you will eat it. You know that if you sleep with your phone, you will scroll. The Shinobi didn't rely on willpower to resist temptation. They removed the option. You must sit down and write if-then algorithms for your life. If I feel too tired to work out, then I will immediately put on my shoes and do 5 minutes. If the restaurant doesn't have healthy food, then I will order 2 appetizers instead of a main course. If my alarm goes off and I want to snooze, then I will count down from 5 and stand up before 0. You are preloading the decision so that your tired, emotional self doesn't have to think. You are treating
yourself like a robot that needs code to function in a chaotic environment. Now, let's look at the domino effect of ignoring this system. If you continue to rely on motivation, you will stay trapped in the cycle of start, stop, guilt. You will engage in what psychologists call moral licensing. You will be good for 3 days, and then your brain will tell you that you deserve a break. That break will turn into a week. That week will turn into a month. 6 months from now, you will be in exactly the same place, but you will be older and you will trust yourself less. This erosion of self-trust is the most dangerous consequence. When you repeatedly break promises to yourself, you develop a subconscious belief that you are not capable of change. This belief bleeds into your career, your relationships, and your mental health. You become a spectator in your own life, watching opportunities pass by because you know you won't follow through. But if you apply the Ninpo system, even imperfectly, something shifts. It starts quietly. You survive the first week. You hit the boredom barrier and you crush it. You navigate a crisis without breaking your streak. Suddenly, you stop looking for motivation. You don't need a video to get you hyped up because you are no longer driven by hype. You are driven by who you are. You become dangerous in the best sense of the word. You become the person in the room who cannot be rattled, who cannot be bought, and who cannot be stopped by discomfort. And this is where the risk quietly increases again, but this time, it is a risk to your old social circle. People will tell you that you have changed. They will say you are too intense. They might even stop inviting you to happy hours because your discipline makes them feel judged. Let them go. You are not building this discipline to be popular. You are building it to be free. Freedom is not lying on the couch doing nothing. That is just decay. True freedom is the ability to choose a
difficult path and walk it without hesitation. It is the ability to command your mind and have it obey instantly. So here is the takeaway. You have a choice right now. You can close this video or stop reading and go back to the comfortable negotiation of your old life. You can tell yourself that this is too extreme, that you are doing fine. Or you can take a piece of paper and write down your oath. You can pick your rhythm. You can define your form. You can design your crisis protocol. And you can prepare for the obstacles. The mountain is waiting. The path is steep, and no one is going to carry you. But for the first time in your life, you have a map. I invite you to subscribe to the channel if you want to go deeper into the psychology of strength. Like this video if you are done with excuses. And in the comments, I want you to leave one word, just one, to signal that you are starting your 100 days. Write Ketsui. Let that be your first act of public commitment. Thank you for your attention. Now, go and build the warrior.